I'd like a few questions from you guys. What's on your minds? Let's see.
Are you Bob?
I am Bob.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good start. That's not going to connect me with the foundation of nature, but
How big is your farm?
How'd you get here?
this farm is cultivated about 30 acres and in actual land 172. Mostly it runs up into the mountain.
What do you grow?
Everything.
Looks like everything.
This is a domestic farm. It's not really, it's a big home garden. And I primarily serve one customer who's a restaurant, and you fill the table with lots of diversity.
Which restaurant?
Chez Panisse in Berkeley.
Oh, right on.
Wow.
They come Monday and Thursday morning right now and pick up a truckload of stuff.
Wow.
So that would be salad greens and just
Well,
all
let's
the
see.
veggies
Today
that
we
you're
had,
using?
did I just ditch the list? Nope, I still got it. Today, no, this is Charlene's list. We had red potatoes and russet potatoes and turnips and onions and leeks and celery and raspberries and Asian pears and lettuce and rocket and a whole bunch of different herbs and peppers and parsley and what did we pick down there? Yeah, I have beautiful spinach. I have beautiful spinach, but just enough for my partner Charlene is a chef as well, and she has 250 back-to-back parties this weekend, and she needs all the spinach, so the restaurant didn't get any. Eggplants and zucchini squash blossoms and tomatoes and all that kind of stuff, you know.
Wow.
Broccoli, and we didn't do cabbage today, but we could have. Broccoli and cauliflower went, and this is a big season because it's the full summer season is still in swing and the winter season is beginning.
So what happens in the winter? Do you do hot housing or
No,
just what
absolutely
you can
not.
provide?
Everything out in the field. In the wintertime, all of the roots, the carrots, the turnips, the rutabagas, the parsley roots, the potatoes continue, all of the leafy things, the chard, the kales, the mustards, the mosh, all of that, Zoe down. All of the salad stuff, all of the chicories are really spectacular through the winter. The winter is actually this is our springtime right now in an arid conditioned state like this. It's just started to rain. Hills are just starting to turn green. This is not, we have a European heritage for the most part. The foundation of our culture, at least, is European heritage, and we come from a northern climate where we have distinct cold winter season for the most part, and this is not the case of these Mediterranean type climates, and the winter is absolutely the best growing season here.
Oh.
Yes.
Can I ask you, how did you get started? How long have you been doing this? Do you lease the land? Do you own the land? Just how are you and all that?
How did I get started?
Yeah.
My parents moved me here along with the rest of the family in 1960 to Kenwood, where we ran an ornamental plant nursery and grew and bought and sold plants for fruitless mulberries and oleanders and stuff like that, and sold lots of petrochemicals, used lots of petrochemicals, very standard procedure. I had a lot of inquiry why it was such a job to grow these few plants in this little nursery, and yet you go out into the structure of nature and there didn't seem to be any disorder or anything, and so after a period of regular schooling, I went off to one of the land-grant colleges for a while to try to have that inquiry answered, and I found out after a couple of years that those institutions at that time, at least, were not interested in inquiry. They were interested in training me to hold a position in corporate agriculture for management stuff, and that wasn't my interest, so I quit, and I continued to run my little nursery for a few more years, and I came up here to the Davises owned the place, and I came up here in '76. And I did a little landscape renewal job for their house up here on the hill, and traded that first year's rent for that little job for my first year's rent. At the time, this was still a pedigree turkey ranch. It was loaded with buildings and 40,000 turkeys for 40 years. It was the important female line breeding operation for Nicholas Turkey Farms, and basically the female line of the broad-breasted market bird of today was bred on this farm. Very prestigious activity, and Phil and Muriel Davis ran it. And I have a lease. No, I have a handshake agreement with my landowning population with Phil, who has been gone for 15 years. So I don't know what I have. I take care of the place and pay generous rent and take care of everything.
That's great.
Who takes care of it with you?
Who takes care of it with me? Right now I have 5 employees, and we have this farm and a 2-acre intensive garden in downtown Sonoma, and a 40-acre garden over in Petaluma, and a 5-acre nursery facility, and 2 other farms over, one right below Benzinger that's was terribly abused over the years by original tenancy of Lamott, who did clean cultivation grapevine culture in the 1800s on the hillsides and lost most of the soil, and then Jack London came along and he bought it and planted eucalyptus trees all over it. Well, I've had that place for 10 years, and the eucalyptuses are gone, the soil's rehabilitated. You went into the Benzinger Cave? No. Well, it's a beautiful big cave. It had something like 60 or 80,000 cubic yards of material taken out of it. I got all of that material. The Benzingers brought it down, and we healed the primary erosion with that material, and I basically cleaned up the land, and that piece is in long-term soil improvement, and it's almost ready to get planted.
Do you have volunteer workers?
No.
What kind of requirements or criteria does Chez Panisse put on on the goods that you sell them?
What kind of?
They make sure that is it all organic?
Oh, far surpasses organic standards. Far surpasses organic standards. And well, like an organic operation, typically you can continue to have an adversarial relationship with nature, and you can abuse soils and denigrate soils, and use organically founded soluble fertilizer elements to support the growth of plants. You can have an adversarial relationship with the insect population and go around killing them as long as they're killed with organically founded compounds. And just because you are growing, like we have a tremendous amount here in this state, and a vast amount of our organic food now coming out of China, just because it's certified organic does not necessarily mean it's nutritionally sound. The crops grown in natural process agriculture, like this farm here, we grow 50% all the time for people of our total cropping system, and 50% to support the structure of nature. And we don't ever go around killing bugs at all. We recognize bugs and all of the other interfaces as beneficial indicators of plant health. And a truly healthy plant, one that has all of its environmental needs met, forms and functions its own natural immunological system to completeness, and there's plenty of bug population, but bugs are the cleaners and the renewers of the plant. They eat the older leaves and clean them up. They eat the older roots. They cycle through the whole system, and bugs are if I go out into a crop and I see heavy indications of insect predation, I know that there is an environmental shortfall there with that plant, and it might be that it is associated with any one of the 4 primary food groups that all life is based upon. Like right now we could go out possibly into a patch of summer squash, and because it's a little early yet, but because of rainfall and cool nights and less sunlight, the zucchini plant needs lots of heat and lots of sunlight, and so we might be able to find a few white fly out there in the zucchini patch. But at the same time, the zucchini patch is a harborer, a progenitor of the cucumber beetle. They look like ladybugs, except they're green, and some have spots and some have stripes. And those guys are attracted to orange, and just the color of orange of your jacket almost, and yellow orange, and and that zucchini blossom opens and closes. In the morning it opens, and at night it closes, and those little bugs get to crawl in there in the evening and get closed up and protected within the reproductivity of the host plant. They're a wonderful relationship. And in the morning, a blossom opens up, those guys come out, they eat up the lower leaves, and they carry with them, they fly in, they carry with them in their birth. They carry a wide range of soil digestive organisms, just like we do. And then when they eat, they pass that waste stream through their body into the soil under the zucchini plant. It rains or is irrigated in, and that nutrient is recycled, and the plant is cleaned and helped. And they're all bugs are wonderful things, but if I see those bugs defecating in the blossoms and eating the blossoms, and well, this indicates a very poor nutritionally sound zucchini plant, one that can't defend its reproductivity, one that doesn't have that which it needs to keep itself happy. So how can it possibly have that which needs to generate its own completeness, that completeness is going to bring health to the consumer of that plant? And not only just physical completeness, which is incredibly important when we're dealing with nutrition, but the etheric sweetness that comes from a plant free of hunger. Like just yesterday, I was over at the Petaluma farm, the Green String farm at the corner of Freitas Road and Old Adobe Road, and Chow, our salesperson over there, she comes up, well, I've 2 new customers. We just opened about a month ago. I have 2 new customers. They're both moms, and they've come back for more broccoli because their kids eat broccoli. They won't eat commercial broccoli. Well, of course, commercial broccoli is toxic. It smells bad. It tastes bad, if it has any flavor at all. And of course, the kids don't want this stuff. But you give them real broccoli from a broccoli plant that has had all of its environmental, nutritional foundations met. And it is a wonderful, sweet, clear smelling critter that hardly ever has any predation on it at all.
Do you have any particular sources you'd point us to if we wanted to look into this, your methodologies more, like on the net or books or anything?
The best conservative mouthpiece for alternative agriculture in the nation is a publication called Acres, ACRES, USA.com. They also have a hard copy magazine print that you can subscribe to.
Where do you get your water?
Water comes from springs up on the mountain, and from this creek right here, and from wells. One well that's driven by PG&E power, and one well that's driven by solar power. If you take a typical sample of raw crushed igneous rock, it'll contain maybe 70 or 80 different elements in it. And of those 70 or 80 different elements, they're held in thousands of different mineral compounds. And those mineral compounds are what every catalytic enzymatic system uses. Then the mineral is the catalyst. And it stays put. And it gets used and used and used. And finally, it might get dirty and used up and not be able to hold and exchange hydrogen bonds properly, and so it's dismissed and a new one is put into its place. But the raw parent materials, if those things are used, as such as in a garden like this, yes, there's great economy and there's freedom from disorder. And if there is disorder, then we need to reach into one of the other 2 primary food groups, which are air foods, including soluble air that was just coming down, 2 gases coming together to form the electrolyte we call water that allows the fluidity of life to transpire. And nothing interfaces directly with the world but through other organisms. And plants are carnivorous. They make lots of sugars and other substances coming from plants, phytosubstances, and they're secreted from the root system to stimulate the biology of the soil, predominantly the bacteria. And those bacteria live and solubilize the minerals of the soil and bring the minerals from rock bond into their protoplasmic organically bonded condition, and when they die, the plant gets that protoplasm and forms and functions its body with it. And the other primary element is the sunlight, and sunlight's extremely complex. We know very little about all of the cosmic energies, and it's one thing that nobody's yet put a price on. We still don't have to pay for sunlight. We've got new air like we're breathing, and soluble air like we're feeling in the rainfall. And then we have old air. We have fixed air like this material here. This is carbon out of the atmosphere that's been structured by the plant and held together. The bonds are held together by the energy of sunlight. And this is going to go into the soil. We could put it in our wood stove, and it's a piece of sage, and we could smoke some chicken with it, or we could let it digest in the soil, and that digestion is all of the soil biology, the yeasts, the molds, the funguses, the bacterias, the protozoas, and everybody else, the culture of a civilized soil living in harmony, balancing, changing, going in cycles, everything. We know nothing about it, and this stuff here becomes the fixed air that is the compost, the food source for the soil digestion. And the soil digestion is going out and getting any typical garden rock. And here's one that's already broken. And this typical piece of natural rock of Sonoma Mountain, and on the outside it's digested, it's been acidulated, it's been softened. The acids of soil biology have been exchanged for the alkalis of the rock in simple forms. Where it hasn't been, where it's been split recently, it's hard. It's much less digested. We'll find one that's extremely digested. That's actually an imported road rock, but here's a natural rock. Oh, wow. Just rotted away. And if we were of strength to be able to crack this mother open, we'd see the inside of it as hard as a rock. Yes, you had a question, dear.
Yeah, I'm just curious, how do you incorporate the native part of this mountain into your stewardship? I mean, I specifically just coming to think of it, you know, I'm sure you have deer coming across here. What do you do to
well,
for
starters, when I first came here, this creek line had a few near dying oak trees on it, and they used to run the bulldozer up and down the creek bed and keep it eroded out so that none of the precious turkeys would get their feet wet. And they scraped all of the manure and piled it in the creek in order to get rid of it. And that's how things went in those days. And I've planted thousands of willows and alders and poplars and all of those kinds of riparian, semi-riparian plants, and built many structures like that pile of brush over there to capture the sediment, the erosionary sediment that flows off the mountain. And where this creek used to run 2 or 3 days after a good hard rain, it's now a year-round creek because of this kind of work. And we get a few small steelheads in it, and toads and salamanders and all sorts of things like that. Perimeterizing the main garden, I never used to have a fence at all, but about 15 or 20 years ago we had an invasion of feral pigs that continue to ruin the garden. So I have a perimeter fence around the place, but there are deer in here every night. And they don't bother hardly anything at all. They love to eat the weeds that I grow. They love those amaranthus heads. A young grapevine, if I can tell you for sure, if you want some plant to be taken out, all of these organisms are agents of mercy, a bug or a deer. They go around looking for weakness, and they eat the weak, sick plant up and take it out of its misery and open up that piece of ground to something that can grow in a healthy fashion there. And whether it might be a gopher, and gophers are notoriously attracted to broccoli and to garlic. And I can tell you from experience that this indicates to me that there's a shortfall of calcium within the soil and subsequently within the plant. And by applying crushed oyster shell to that block of garlics, within 2 or 3 days, the system absorbs those garlic, that calcium resource, and allows itself to make root exudates and other flavoring elements that cause the garlic no longer to be desirable to the gopher, and they stop eating them. And there's always a portion of all cropping systems that are lost to everything. And everything that you do, there's an inefficiency. And about a third of all of the foodstuffs that we grow for humanity is lost in transportation and storage, and that's a terrible inefficiency. And we have a percentage of loss in the cultural side as well. But there are only 2 things that give us that phenotypic, that food crop plant that's before us. And one is the genetic material, and 2 are all of the environmental influences. And the environmental influences is what the farmer is about managing. And I don't test the soils. I look at the crop. I look at the plants. I utilize my common senses in order to taste and touch and smell and tear and feel and see and totally understand the plant like we might understand our love partner or child or something. You can tell what kind of day it's going to be or what kind of it is by how the car comes into the driveway. And we can use those same senses that become instinctive to, and they are instinctive with some of us within our own species. And you can use those same capacities to those common senses to truly pay attention to your cropping system. You look at the new leaf and the old leaf and the relationship between predation on the new leaf population versus the old leaf population. You feel the anchorage. You know how hard a weed is to pull out. Well, they have good anchorage. They got to grow there of choice. They're of purpose, of protecting and nurturing that piece of earth, and they belong there. So they're hard to pull out. Where a lot of times you'll move your heel a little bit trying to pull out the weed, and you'll knock out the petunia that came in a 4-inch pot. That you look at the character of the root. You go to the nursery and you buy a typical commercially grown plant. You pull it out of the pot. Where do you find the roots? Outside and on the bottom, racing around. That plant has innate intelligence. It knows what it needs is not in that pot. So it's the tiger in the cage syndrome. Tiger isn't looking in the middle of the cage to get out. It's prancing the walls. It wants to get out. And the same thing with the plant. It has two kinds of roots. It has seeking roots. They're establishment roots, actuality. And when a seed first grows, it sends out an establishment, like a taproot. And it reaches into its soil environment. And it comes up against an obstruction, like the bottom of a pot, or a rock, or the shallowness, or the moisture, or an anaerobisis of the soil, any of those kinds, all sorts of environmental soil variables. But in this case, it's the bottom of the pot. It hits the bottom of the pot. If that soil pot is filled with beautifully digested, fully nurtured, nature-based, biologically, minerally enriched compost, hey, it stops. I don't need to seek anymore. I just need to fill out. And it develops massive little root systems that are feeding roots. Well, establishment roots are great if the plant's young, but once the plant is no longer young, and it has that kind of a few long roots trying to go someplace, those are an indication. You pull one up and you see that, you know that there's a problem with the soil. It's turning its seeking roots. It's telling you that it has a few long skinny roots. It's telling you that it's discontent within that location, and it knows it's got to get someplace else if it's going to get the nutrition that it needs in order to make a crop of seed babies, which is its goal in life. And if you pull it up and you see masses of beautiful little diversified short branched feeding roots, this is a manifestation of contentment, and you can see that in the posture of the plant. You can look at the cropping system and you can see whether the plant is strong and upright and filled with itself, and whether the leaves are bilaterally symmetrical and smooth and clean and have a uniform texture to them. You can feel the waxiness. You can look at the spininess. Lots of plants have either wax or they have furry, spiny kind of stuff. And furry, spiny kind of stuff, those little spines, to us they're just fur, we call them, but to a little bug they're like cactus stickers, you know. They can't get through that kind of stuff. And it's waxiness. You can't bite through waxiness. A well-grown cherry, birds love to eat cherries. A well-grown, not overripe cherry is so plump onto itself, and they have grown this way. What do cherries do? But they hang on a long pedestal. They hang on a little long stem, and the birds there, boink, boink, boink. The peck strength isn't great enough for the gravity strength. It's like playing that volleyball or something. It goes around. It won't work. When it gets overripe, or if it's poorly nourished, then it's flaccid and is soft, and the bird just devours right into it. No, you pay attention to the posture, the color, the texture, the tear strength, the smell, the yield, the strength of the root system, the character of the stem. You look at the difference between the old leaves and the young leaves. Those are your soil tests. Those are your indicators. You're not to reach out as a farmer to, great, you guys are a group of students, go to the colleges, get your PhDs, go to the laboratory, study life to the greatest degree possible. Give me your reports. Allow me to draw my own conclusions from your work. Don't go around telling the farmer, oh, this is what plants need. We make terrible mistakes. And those terrible mistakes have led to a degraded food supply. Working very closely with nature and allowing the plant, giving these raw parent food groups that have everything that are found within the structure of nature, the mineral food group, the rock food group, the digestive food group, the digestion of the soil, the contact food group, the air foods, plenty of good clean air and plenty of fixed air within the structure of soil, and all of the cosmic energies we call sunlight, allowing all of this stuff to come together within its own intelligence, rather than us laying something upon the species that we know nothing about, allowing the system to have a life of choice. You give the system of gardening, of farming, or whatever, a life of choice, you'll come out with a fine product that has all of the nutritional foundation that it's supposed to have, and the fullness of character and flavor and smells that it's supposed to have, the long-standing condition of preservation that it's supposed to have, and the true energy that it's supposed to have. Yes?
I think Amy wanted to. I was going to say we have 45 minutes about, so I don't know.
Okay, that was enough.
I
Yes.
have a quick question for you. So you've looked at the plant, you've made a determination that there is something wrong because you see something out of balance within the plant. Without doing a soil analysis, how do you determine what is the...
Well, there are
what's
four
out of
primary
balance?
food groups. So I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to see there's a disorder.
Yeah.
And so, what's the disorder? Oh, it has lots of bugs. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to get some raw crushed rock, and I'm going to put that and feed that baby with it. I'm going to put it right at the base of that plant, and I'm going to water it in so we can get contact with this new nutrient source with the soil. And I'm going to come back the next day, and I'm going to take out my pocket knife, and I'm going to start digging soil away from the base of that plant, and I'm going to observe whether it has new fat white roots growing up into that new nutrient source. And if they see that, then I know that I've hit it right.
Okay.
And if I don't see that, then I'm going to come back and immediately, and I'm going to bring some fixed air, some compost food to that plant, and I'm going to put some new soil biology around that plant, and I'm going to water that in, and I'm going to come back and observe the root response the next day. And as I'm walking up to the plant, I'm going to look at the plant, and I've studied the plant in its age. I've looked at the old, always goes down before the new, and I'm going to have I have an understanding of its old life, its past leaf. That's its past. And I'm looking at its present, its new leaf, its growth right now. And by having a polarity of its past and present, I can predict its future. And I'm going to bring a nutrient source like compost to that, and I'm going to water it in, and I'm going to come and look at the plant the next day and dig the soil away and look at the root response to it. And, proliferated with white roots. Now, does that tell me that it didn't need the minerals and it liked the compost, or did it need a combination of those two things? And I, as a farmer, don't really care. My job is to keep costs as low as possible and produce as good a food as I can with the least amount of input. But hell, a little bit of crushed rock that cost me about $50 an acre, and a little bit of compost that cost me probably about the same. They are very minor inputs. For the most part,
So it's trial and error basis within parameters.
no, it's not trial and error. It's observation and building a foundation of knowledge based upon observation.
Yeah. Okay.
You don't go and raise your kids trial and error. Let's beat one we're silly this week and see how it works out. And then next week, let's love it up. And then next week, let's put it in a box. And next week, let's decide to feed it. No, that's trial and error. No, trial and error. This is systematic operation. I grow food. I started here in 76, and we got the farmers market started in 77 or 78, and between the farmers markets, which I don't do anymore, and the restaurant that I transferred into, in those 30 years I've never missed a load. Safeway is never closed. The farmer in this temperate kind of climate must produce, must be consistent. This is a sacred deal that the land has with the people, and it comes in one hand and out the other hand, including all of the income. It goes to the troops. It just all flows around. Nature is an incredibly generous organism. Yes, we haven't answered a question there yet.
Is the wisdom that you represent being passed on to future farmers?
Absolutely. 30 years ago, they ridiculed people like myself for being proponents of the organic kingdom. And today, their corporate agriculture is kiping it off and denigrating it, quite frankly. But within another 20 years, because of economic forces of fuel and transportation and the benefits of locally grown food and the increased consciousness of the population in recognizing the importance of locality and importance of seasonality and the importance of freshness, within another 20 years we've gone in this country from having something like 20 million farmers down to less than 200,000 farmers. In another 20 years we're going to be closer to the 20 million again. Yes.
What do you find that your biggest challenges are, whether it's agricultural, economic, whatever?
Agricultural is not a problem. I, about 5 years ago, started working with a very abused, not the worst, but a fairly very abused piece of ground that consists of about 800 acres of commercial grapevines here in the valley. And it's taken me 5 years, and they came back with the pedio analysis. Oh, we got to do some soil tests, and oh, we got to do this. Okay, go ahead, guys, do it. You know, waste some money. I don't care. And beautiful crop. Hardly any inputs besides what I've talked about. They've used 2 truckloads instead of 6 or 8 truckloads a year of organically mined dusting sulfur to control powdery mildew. And we didn't even need to do that, but the insecurity of the operators, and you can't just eliminate everything all at once. You got to go through the process. The pedio analysis comes back. Oh, and we need a few parts per million potassium. Well, right. No, you seek and achieve balance through feeding the structure of nature. No, nature is not a challenge. The economics, it's a bit of a challenge, but I've been here, I pay a lot of rent, and I pay my workers about 20% more than I should in terms of traditional value around in the neighborhood, and I have maintained my own economic solvency by not having very many demands myself. I'm perfectly happy wearing what I've got on and driving company trucks. I don't need a new Porsche, and I don't need all sorts of stuff.
Could you do what you're doing if you weren't feeding a restaurant?
Oh, absolutely. I'd made lots more money at the farmer's market. All cash. and cash to the workers, and happy people. No, I used to go to the Santa Rosa Farmers Market downtown, the one on at the Vets building, and for years through '85 I did that. And Saturday afternoon in '85 money was $5,000, and it takes me a long time to get. It takes three loads to the restaurant, a week and a half to get $5,000 in gross, and the beans have to be all the same exact size, and they have to be in the box, all organized. At farmer's market, you pick big ones and little ones and everything in between, and somebody wants it.
So why aren't you doing it anymore?
I ran that farmer's market for 11 years, and my goal was to promote diversified local domestic agriculture. I taught at the local junior college for 23 years, and I had many of my students there, and yet the Santa Rosa Press Democrat and other newspapers like that talked about the farmer's market kind of as a flea market where fruits and nuts sold vegetables. There's truth to all of that, but we had bad press, and those people from that famous restaurant wanted me to interact and develop relationship with them, and I've done so, and I dropped out of the what did they call it? Sonoma Select program. I stopped putting any energy into that, and I stopped doing the farmer's market, and I started selling vegetables to there. And Sonoma County has gotten a tremendous amount of very positive national press because of that activity, and that's why I had to do that. And so what? I make less money. Who cares? What am I going to do with money at any rate? Yes.
Can you talk about biodynamics? Because it sounds like that's what you're doing here.
This is a biodynamic activity, but true biodynamics is a religious activity, and you must follow through with a protocol set up by people that followed Rudolf Steiner in the 20s. Yeah. And it's a great activity, but to me, I don't have cows. here. I do have cows on another farm, but I don't have cows here. This is not an animal farm. This is not Germany 1920. This is you and your farm, and it's your job to use your common senses and all of the tools that you have to bring the condition of growth in the land and the condition of growth in the quality of your foodstuffs to the digestive organs of your customer population to as high a pinnacle as you can. And some antique dogma does not do it for me. Leeks and chicories and carrots and beets and zucchinis and parsley and pears and cherries and apples and what else do I have? The turnips and stuff like that. This is cabbages in here. There's a strip that's basically clean for people where the crop plant is produced, and then there's a strip that is allowed to manifest itself to maturity, and these weeds were about this big about 10 days ago when they were mowed off. And they're allowed to come to as much maturity as possible. We could barely see the broccoli cabbage plants anymore, and then the little mower comes through and mows these all down. And so now the canopy is turned over temporarily to the human side crops, and the soil is held and supported, and there's no mud, and there's no mud being splashed onto the leaves that causes lots of disorder with all cropping systems. And it's in that basis, my rows are farther apart, and I'm looking at a 75% human side crop. I'm of theoretical gross yield, 75%. I don't want a big crop. I want a good crop. I want a trouble-free crop, and I want a 75% crop. And I'm going to do that twice during the course of the year. This is the beginning of this was potatoes in the spring, and now it's turned into brassicas. And I got a 75% potato crop. Usually potatoes are even more. They're just so generous. And I have so many potatoes I can't get them all dug. They should have been dug before this rain, and we probably have 20 tons of them out there still. So I get two 75% human side crops for an annual theoretical total gross yield of 150%, and the same thing on the other side for nature. And it's being grown and harvested right now. And so that extra, I'm not looking for sustainable. I don't, the University of California badmouthed organic for years, and then they finally realized that it had grown up to a sufficient degree that they had to embrace a certain change, and they wouldn't say organic was any good, so they come up with this concept of sustainable in the mid-'80s, and 83 or 4, and sustainable's no good. I want growth. I want things. I want to leave my farm with better soil conditions when I have to depart than when I arose, and I've done so. And I have hope that I can leave the consciousness of humanity in better condition through their digestive systems when I have to leave as well. And I want. That's what I want, is growth. And that extra 50% of theoretical gross yield on both sides. Of course, there are these inefficiencies. You have to use the tractor, and some little areas are too wet, and very important to work soils when it's just right. But the faucet wasn't quite turned off, and there's a little leak out there, and there's a spot that's too wet. I get soil compaction. That's a bad thing. That's inefficiency. There's a spot where the sprinkler didn't rotate properly, and it's a little dry, and a cloud of dust blows off. That's an inefficiency. There's all of those kinds of things. And on the human side, well, we grow it and we put it on plates, and most of it ends up in the compost, or worse yet, the landfill. If it's back to the compost, it comes back to the garden. It's no big deal. And then this crop will be fed with compost teas in order to bring soil digestion to it, and through the irrigation system. And this crop has been fed with raw crushed rock and oyster shell to bring all of the minerals of the earth element together. And the sunlight is coming to this area, and it's those weed plants, those soil improvement plants, are absorbing it and fixing it and making sugars and fixing carbon, and that carbon then is now starting to slime and rot. That carbon is being digested by a plethora of soil digestive organisms, and it's cycling back into the soil and rotting more of the natural raw apparent rock material of this particular piece of land.
Do you leave it all on the ground, Bob, or do you come?
Leave it all on the ground.
All of it.
You couldn't possibly. If I had to rake it all up and clip it all up, why move it and compost it and bring it back? So you'll just burn up a lot of inefficiencies. But if I had to do that, I'd have to go from 5 support people to 50, and then I would be able to sell my products as reasonably as I do.
Does it matter if any of these grasses or weeds that come up are non-native?
No, it would. You anytime you have any disturbances, pretty much all of these weeds. The only way you're going to get native. See on that hillside up there where there are olive trees growing. I have about 600 olive trees on this place. We make enough olive oil to cook the food that we grow here. That's my goal, at any rate. And I think we're close to it. And under those kinds of conditions, there we have a perennial crop as the human support crop, and an annual crop, predominantly annual and herbaceous perennial, as the nature support crop. And those trees don't require irrigation. They were irrigated for their first 2 years by a hose, and that's the end of it. And they under those conditions, we can get stable and start to stimulate traditional indigenous biology. On my soil improvement farm over in Glen Ellen, right below Benzinger, I just had an analysis. My buddy Bob Schaefer is very much into it, and so he studies that place for me and gives me a species report on it, and we're at 40% indigenous species after 10 years, and from eucalyptus trees. Fantastic.
That's great. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. And it's stable, and I'm never going to cultivate that soil again. I had to cultivate it a lot to clean it up and get it ready, but that's going to turn into a tree farm of some sort, probably prunes. I think we need more prunes in our diet, and so I'm probably going to plant prunes. But they're very good. They have lots of good stuff in them that we don't get. They have lots of good stuff. Elementally, very important food crop, the plum group, and they fit in this environment very well. Yes.
When you first take over a piece of property that has been disregarded, what's your approach? What do you do first?
Well, this one was packed down hard as it could possibly be. It was like concrete all over, so at first I needed to break it up. So I got my biggest little tractor that I could get. It was like a 60 horsepower tractor, and I pulled straight shank chisels through it, little rippers, to break up the compaction. And then you plant soil improvement crops in it. You bring in various kinds of plants. Doesn't matter what they are, as long as, and a mixture is always best. And you allow them to come to full maturity and grow out and die of their own condition, like you see in the olive trees or in the peach trees. And then you incorporate them. And while those guys are growing, you feed them. You start going up into the mountains, and you get little handfuls of indigenous compost. And you introduce that little handful of indigenous compost into your compost generating systems, and you proliferate that indigenous compost. And then that goes into the compost tea brewers. And whenever you irrigate that, you pump some of that indigenous compost tea into the system. So you bring the biology of nature back to where it's been lost. And there's a curve of life support that goes somewhat like this. And where it was abused when you inherited it, maybe it was like this. And you grow a cover crop, and that puts sugars and good carbonaceous material, and you put a compost tea in it, and each input allows the next input to get a little bit bigger. If you take that digestion and that rock, put it as DR for doctor, in order to remember it. We don't have the chalkboard out here. And then we have air foods and light, so we have Dr. Al. And you put a cross, an X in the middle of that, and you put a dot in the middle of that cross, and you start growing out with that seed. That dot is a seed, and it grows out and enfolds all of those things, and getting a little bit more carbon from the air allows it to have a little bit more leaf surface and a little bit more root surface, so it can photosynthesize and absorb more sunlight energy and secrete more sugars. And the more you have, the more you can have. And the less you have, the less you're going to have. Do you realize anybody come from Sebastopol?
Yeah.
That Sebastopol 150 years ago was a temperate rainforest. That means 100 inches a year through the course of the year in every month of the year. Well, it was a rainforest because it was a rainforest. It grew redwood trees predominantly. And the redwood trees were the first crop. What was the second most important, first agricultural crop in Sebastopol area?
Apples?
No.
Hops?
Yeah, potatoes in the bottomlands. Number one raspberry producing area in the nation for a period of time. Summer rains, rich, fertile soils. Gold Ridge noted one winter rain, 18 inches of topsoil lost off of Gold Ridge. And the raspberry era lasted about 20 years. And then the forest was all cut down, no more rainforest, no more summer rains, no more really good rich soil surface duff that was an act of contribution from the forest period. And so they went to apples. And apples lasted from about 1880 to by the time 1970 came along, there were so many problems with apples that the University of California Ag Extension here in Santa Rosa said, apple decline syndrome. So many problems, it's a syndrome. It's apple age. You can't grow apples here anymore. And they declared apples dead in Sebastopol. Not even 1 century. The soils were ruined to such a depth of by clean coal, all for people and nothing for nature. Of course, it's going to collapse. You don't get lunch for 100 years, it's going to collapse. You know, it can't be. It doesn't matter what the organism. And so, what do they grow there now? Grapevines. Yet Pinot Noir grape, you never used to be able to grow grapevines there. It was too rich and too moist and too good of an environment 150 years, even 100 years ago to grow grapevines there. Now you grow grapevines there. The soils have been denatured and denuded and destroyed, and if we keep going with the same cultural practices, then in another 100 years you won't be able to grow grapevines there. Sebastopol will have to be known for buckwheat or something that grows on very it is in the process of being turned into a desert. Even I, as a child, not even a child, you'd go, when I was 20, you'd go up to Anderson Valley, the next valley up north basically, east-west valley, and it was fertile, and you grew apple trees there, and the hillsides were still loaded with redwood trees, and it rained a little bit in the summer, not every month. It had already been pushed back from that stage, but it was a beautiful, rich, fertile place, and there were no grapevines there. But now they're all Pinot Noir grapevines up there. Well, they have a few other Pinot Gris and a few other varieties, but for the most part, it's recognized as a Pinot Noir brand. And
when you're reconstituting a soil, you know, rehabilitating one, so to speak, do you use the cover crop as your indicator of,
you bet.
of when you've got it back to that balance?
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet. And you plant at the same time, you come into this piece of abused soil and you have limited resources. So you've planted one cover crop. You went through one cycle of nutritional support, and very important to allow that cover crop to come to full maturity and die of its own condition. Allow it to have its whole life. And that material, when it dies of its own condition, is brown like under the olive trees. It has a durable, longer than 1 year half-life. So some of that carbonaceous material stays. You begin to get a steady state, a full plate of food throughout the course of the year. And it didn't all rot, so the next year's plate's a little bit fuller. And that's a very important concept. There's lots of stuff that you'll see in the study of organic agriculture, and they recommend the foundation of nutrient stability with green manure cover crops. Well, this is infanticide, killing the babies. They haven't even flowered yet, and you're supposed to plow them down. They're high nitrogen. That high nitrogen goes into the soil, is digested by the microfloral population, it turns into ammonia, it sterilizes the soil and volatilizes the nitrogen back up into the atmosphere. A total loss. No, never, and if you can at all avoid it, kill babies. Remember sometime a few months ago we had a real 10-day or less, a 6 or 7 day searing heat period? Well, these onions were planted just before then. And even though I watered them every day, I lost a lot of them. They became spotty. And they're all different varieties. And this variety is the most subject to it. And this field was clean cultivated. All of the weeds were eliminated. 2 times we hand hoed this patch. And then the second time, it took all of us about 2 hours to do it. Not too big of a deal. And there'll be 20,000 pounds of onions in a good crop on this size of piece of ground. And so it's worth it. And on the second hoeing, then see this light green material in here? These are all clovers. That's crimson clover. And the clover seeds spread before it's hoed. So when it's hoed, the clover seed's incorporated, and that is the nature support crop. And you can have tightly managed systems, or you can have loosely managed systems. It's completely immaterial, but you've got to have a system that recognizes the nutritional support of both groups of organisms, the people as well as all of the rest of the critters of the soil. And if you don't, these soils on this mountain farm here there's a national soil survey with all of the lands of the nation are surveyed and measured for soil quality and character. and it's the physical matrix of the soil that is what has been measured. And they're given a number on a sortie index from 1 to 99. These soils up here are at 27. We're not supposed to grow row crops up here. We're supposed to grow a little bit of hay maybe, and maybe some woody tree crops. That's what is considered adaptive to this kind of soil. But the thing that the soil survey does not take into consideration is the importance of the fraction of what is most important, soil life. And by maintaining a high degree of soil life, you can take a rock pile and grow beautiful stuff on it. By taking the most beautiful YOLO soil at 99 and ignoring life and killing life, you can struggle to grow a decent crop on it, even though it's 50 feet deep and has every nutrient, water holding and exchange capacity and everything else that's extremely desirable.
So Bob, does healthy soil have sort of like a natural shelf life, for lack of a better word, or where it can actually sustain?
Does a healthy soil have a natural shelf life?
No, in terms of...
Well, if you take a natural soil, like the Sebastopol rainforest soil, it takes maybe 20 or 30 years to mine out and exhaust all that's been accumulated by the building structure, the climax of that particular soil. And once you've mined it out, I guess its shelf life is gone. But left to its own devices, you know, if I walked away from here, this year it would be a weedy field of malvas and onions and clovers. And next year, up would come a whole different population of things in the wintertime. And all summer it would lay in summer dormancy. And because I wasn't here to irrigate it and take care of it in that fashion. So it would plug into the natural cyclical process. And right now the new ones would be starting to sprout up from underneath the thatch of the old ones. And the old ones would still be laying on the soil surface, holding and protecting it. And it'd get better, be a natural cycle of getting better. But humanity has a great opportunity to make, you know, we could take the foundation knowledge of natural process agriculture, and with the same amount of money that the international nations have spent beating up the Iraqi people over the last 15 years or whatever it is now, we could take that same economic petro resource and the Sahara Desert could be well on its way to being a meadow. It's got plenty of water. It rains over most of it, at least 10 inches, it's plenty. It's got a good water table over much of it. It's got plenty of groundwater. What doesn't it have? It doesn't have any mineral nutrients. Its soil biology has collapsed. All that needs to be done is bring those two elements back into play and put starter seeds into place, and it'll come.
So you don't have to rotate crops. You can just,
no, you don't have to rotate. You can plant anything, anytime, anywhere you want.
You just plant onions for the next 50 years.
You could plant onions permanently. No, never have any of those. There are no diseases and disorders that are not surmountable through natural process agriculture.
We need to head back to the bus.
No, we got to walk around the other side first, but we'll get there. Be careful on those rocks going up there, guys. Well, it's all right. It doesn't seem to be snapping. It's not very fast.
I know. I didn't hear that part.
Did you hear that part? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wow, let's put the... Yep.
Now, since I'm not, I don't have enough time to give you the full program here, we have what we're doing throughout the garden is mimicking the structure of nature. In these barrels, this one here is one I'm using right now, very finely refined compost, thoroughly digested refined compost. This is a high fungal compost. There's another one that's a high bacterial compost. All of these start out and they're based upon layers of herbs, and in this case algae, and high quality carbonaceous stuff, in this case sawdust, and fruits such as spoiled tomatoes, which we have lots of right now. This is lemon verbena, that's the foundation of this particular barrel, and they'll all get filled up and capped off and sit over winter and turn into one kind of, worms will come and go and turn into one kind or another of biological foundation material. And all of them get, down below, I have another row of buckets, and those buckets have all been inoculated with all of the little handfuls of material. 2 5-gallon buckets a year is all I need, of little handfuls of composts from under redwood trees and bay trees and from all my farms and every place I ever go in the world. I bring compost back, just a little bit of it, but mostly it's dead on indigenous compost. And that compost proliferates, and then these buckets are seeded with it, and then these buckets go out to many other different farms and different pieces of land. I keep about 100 or more buckets going at most times, and they're all dispersed right now in time to start up new ones in the fall. And it's that compost is going to go, a little handful of it at a time. Excuse me, I have to turn the pump on to speed things up here. This is an aerobic compost tea brewer. And what we're doing is filling this vessel up with water, and that little pump right there is a reciprocal air pump. It's just like a big fan, and it's going to suck atmospheric air and put a few pounds of atmosphere pressure on it and bubble that air into this tank, so that this tank becomes an aerobic brewer. And we're going to put foodstuffs in here, and it'll be totally filled up, but because I only have 6 more minutes, I'm going to put a handful of coarse ground seaweed extract, finished dried seaweed in it. And I ran out of salt up here, but I'll use a little handful of full spectrum sea salt, not Morton's sodium chloride sea salt, but full real sea salt with all of the different chlorides in it. And it'll get a little handful of that kind of fungal compost and a little handful of bacterial compost and a little handful of today shrimp shell meal. And sugars are very good, even if they're fermented. So it gets 1 bottle of beer.
I like it already.
Charlene was clearing out the refrigerator, so the garden gets beer. Or any kitchen scrap tea or broth or anything. You take all of your kitchen scraps and you boil them up and let it cool down and sit overnight and drain that liquid part into here and feed the sludge to your worm bin. And that's a beautiful food source. Milk, eggs, any nutrition, all variable. Flours, oat flour, if you want to stimulate lots of fungal activity, very good. All sorts of stuff. Anything that would be good for you is good for all of the biology that's going to go into the soil. And what we're doing here, between this, is what we're doing here is up there in the mountains, there's all of the wild critters live up there. All the critters of scale and of smallness, of soil biology. And when the snow melts or the winter rains come, all of that stuff ends up in the creek. And the creek has rocks in it, and the water is tumulted and aerated. And that little bit of population that erodes into the creek proliferates into a bloom. And so all of the biology of the mountain blooms in the creek, and it's supposed to, when it comes to the valley floor, flood and bring the biology of the mountain to the valley floor upon every flooding season. Well, our culture denies flooding. We should be plugging up the creeks, but they built towns in the beautiful soils and leave them and adjudicate the mountains to be not buildable, just to be looked at. Just absolutely 180 degrees opposite of what nature requires for good conditions. Instead, I have to farm on the rock pile while they get to build a new hospital on the best piece of ground in Sonoma Valley. You know, just totally absurd. But this is how our culture is, and so I have to now manufacture biological creek tea, and that's what this is doing. And it's pumping a lot of air into it. In addition, the other thing that comes down in the creeks, all those rocks start up big in the mountains. By the time they get to the ocean beach, the only thing that's left is the silica, the hard little sand. All of the softer elements have been put into suspension or solution of the water, and a new mineral-rich tea is carried out onto the land. And now I have to go and get volcanic rocks and take them to a special rock grinding place where they make cement dust and get it all ground up to a fine powdered cement in a plant, and burn petroleum and electricity to trucks and everything to do that, because we don't allow nature to do it. No, the more you do and the more you take away, the most you can do is be hydroponic. That's the farthest away you can grow, and that's great technology. When and if we go and colonize Mars, that's a great place for hydroponic culture. But here on Mother Earth, natural support agriculture is the process that I would recommend. So we have to keep the air going, otherwise it'll go anaerobic. If we could put pure E. coli manure in here, and in a few hours they'd all be dead because they can't survive the oxygenation. We could put vinegar in there, and that tea is going to get dumped into that tank, that's going to go into that tank, that's going to go out to all of the garden plants every time we irrigate. And it's circulated and designed to energize and purify the water. And these barrels will have vinegar in them. A little bit of vinegar will go in there. These barrels will have, I'll get from my friends the Turis who don't use sulfur in their wine. Sulfite-free wine, naturally grown. I grow money of the grapes. And they have a bad barrel, one goes off, that wine goes in. Things like alcohol. Worms never evolved beyond worms because they can smell alcohol 3 miles away. They're determined alcoholics. That's their primary interest. That's what they seek out, that fermentation process. And these barrels here are herb tea sun brewing tanks. All of the excess herbs that are picked, oregano to rosemary, anything, all goes into these and is allowed to sit in the sun, in the hot summer sun, for a day or two before it goes off, and then the herb tea is drained into the water system, and then the whole field will smell like lavender. Or you put it on late in the evening, and that's an energetic change. Yes. This is today's delivery of compost ingredients from the restaurant that I sell vegetables to. Every day, in order to get fresh vegetables, they've got to bring the little truck filled up with waste stream vegetables. The sawdust comes from a man who over there on that mountain makes famous guitars, Fender guitar parts. And some of the other sawdust comes from Maureen, who has a horse, and that's some of her horse litter. And very little manure, but lots of urine is soaked up into the pine sawdust. And this pile has been being worked on for this year, and this is last year's pile. And that little pile there is one of the special compost piles that I grow comfrey and other herbs. And then the comfrey is all harvested, and that pile was this big about 3 weeks ago, and it's all rotted down, and that's going to go into topping off those barrels.
How do you direct one of the barrels, the compost barrels? You said one of them was directed towards
fungal and one bacterial. High nitrogen, bacterial. High durable carbon, fungal.
Okay.
And simplicity.
Yeah.
If you seem to have focused questions, look up soilfoodweb.com. Dr. Elaine Ingram's. We work closely together on a lot of things. Soilfoodweb.com.
I will do that.
Every full moon, we have a time cycle where we have to plant. That's how we maintain consistency and order and organization. At every full moon, new things are planted in the garden, for whatever progressive season they are. And this was just planted during and at the same time. Those are chicories that'll be harvested all winter. I don't have any idea what I put in here, but they used to be potatoes. And see all that durable organic straw? This looked just like that. That's potatoes, and it's protective summer weeds. And the potatoes need to get all dug out now because they're getting wet. And so in the next couple days, I'm going to be digging potatoes. And
You do that mechanically?
no, Philemon is digging potatoes right now. See, he has that mechanical device called a spade on his shoulder. and we come and dig potatoes on a fresh basis all summer long from June until now. And then now we have to dig them all up. And it'll take probably one whole day with everybody to dig potatoes.
When I was a kid,
But you know, for 20 bins of potatoes, that's not too much.
Now, you're going to sell those potatoes or you're going to compost them?
Sell them, compost them, and save them for seed, to replant. Now, this patch right in here is very typical of this season. These, you can probably barely see them, but see the weeds are all coming to maturity. These are leeks and weeds, and the leeks are being forced upright, so they'll have a long, clean, blanched shank with no dirt in the leaves. So when you take the leaf to the kitchen. It has a long blanched part of usable leek, and it doesn't have any dirt in the leaves, so you don't have any big cleaning problem, a major hassle with leeks in the kitchen. And the weeds are all coming to maturity. They've been mowed a couple of times, and competition has been managed, not dominated, but managed. And so here we have more than our 75% for nature, and I have a 75% crop of beautiful sweet leeks for people. That's what I'm looking for. And they get the same thing, the crushed tea, the compost, the crushed rock, the compost tea. Now, this is the example of the raw crushed rock that got rained on, unfortunately, but it's still dry down underneath here. It's a very fine, dusty powder, 2800 mesh. This has all of the mineral nutrients in it. I can't recommend one thing anymore. Most of our soils are denuded of mineral nutrients, and just through the use of allowing soil improvement crops to grow, and growing compost, and feeding raw crushed rock, full spectrum igneous raw crushed rock, and a little bit of oyster shell, you can grow a better garden or a better cropping system. I have out on that Klein Cellar vineyard ground, I graze underneath it. Instead of tractoring it and mowing it and whatnot, we graze it with sheep. We have 3,000 or 4,000 sheep that it gets grazed with. It's about 1,000 acres of vineyard ground and some other open ground for off times. And those sheep, Don Watson roses those sheep, and those lambs, those spring lambs, have a growth rate of 1 pound today because of that high energy, fully mineralized crop that grows up off of that tremendous growth rate.
Do you have any problems with keeping them out of the canopy?
No, we want them in the canopy. We pull them out in the springtime when the shoots are little, and then they come back in July, August, and they do all of our leafing work for us.
Yes, that's nice. What about the messing with the young clusters?
They don't touch the young clusters. No, they don't like green grapes.
That's
they
great.
like sweet grapes. Once veration's been hit, they'll go for it.
Yeah, so then you get them out of there.
And for leafing work, we use all the nice little babies.
Yeah.
We'll take all the crop of nice little babies that has certain reach and move them through. Timing and pacing is very important. Timing and patterning and organization and consistency. In the springtime, you go out there and in your first spring moon that you're going to plant your tomato plants, let's say, and you don't know anything about gardening, but you've got to get an early crop of tomatoes, but you don't want them to freeze. So you go out there and you wait until the March, April, full moon, and you plant your tomatoes. And so you remembered it's a March full moon that you planted your tomatoes. So you're grounded. And put the date down. You've got to have a number of variables in order to get an understanding. So if you have the date, you have our calendar, and when the full moon was, whether it was an early or a late March full moon. So it's the third moon of the year, and is it an early one or a late one? And so you're starting to get grounded in the cosmic with the moon cycle, and the human, the calendar cycle. And then when you're all done planting the tomatoes, go out and look at the structure of nature surrounding you. Look at how is the willow tree blossoming out? What's the condition of the scales on the oak tree? What's happening with the buckeye tree? What's happening with all of the woody stuff, all of the big stuff that's long? What's happening with the oak or the maple? All of those big things. If you don't have any of them, just walk around the neighborhood and look at all the ornamentals, even though they're a little confused because they don't really
belong there.
They don't not belong here, but what they do is because people throw commercial fertilizers on them and screw them up, and they're just like drug addict plants, but they still are somewhat connected. And look at the blackberries, everything, and take notes. And then, my tomato crop froze, and my willow tree buds were in this condition. And so now you have lost that particular crop of tomatoes, but you gained knowledge associated with condition of your climate and indigenous environment here, not a mile away, not in a book. Never put anything between you and your plants. You can gather information from all the literature and everything else, but it's you and your baby. You've got to nurse it. You can't get somebody else to do that job. It's you and your child. It's your responsibility. As soon as you put me as your instructor between you and your garden, and you have a failure, you have a grave tendency to blame me. And I'm not there. And I can take the blame. It just goes right off like water off the coat, But nonetheless, the goal is for you to be successful, and it's very important that you're successful. And I would like to see Sonoma County has how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people living here now? 400,000, 450,000, tremendous number. If we were to all spend $2.25 or 35 cents a day on locally grown food products, we'd have $1 million a day in gross cash flow, which would support, let's say, 10 farms like this in the county for each day. So we could have 3,500 farms in round numbers like this one in the county. How many do we have? Maybe 35 if we're lucky.
Yeah,
but that's what we've got to do, is if we're going to develop a stable local food source with interacting with our neighbors, that we can, it's not so important that they used something bad, something from our chemical history. It's important that they get better in the process of doing it. That you recognize it, you know, and that we're honest about it. So I'm going to recommend that you go to greenstringinstitute.org, and you can gather some more information upon what I'm trying to project here, even though it's not anywhere near complete, but it will be by spring.
Is it bagged?
Comes just like that.
That's crushed rock.
That's crushed rock. Comes just like that. That lot comes from Summa Minerals, SUMMA Minerals in Las Vegas.
What if you only need about 10 pounds of it?
Fill your pockets. There's this company, I've been with them 10 years and got them going, but I have yet to be able to get them to retail bag it. But stop and ask Shao at Green String Farm on the corner of Freitas and Old Adobe Road.
Is that this town, Glen Ellen?
Green String Farm and Freitas and Old Adobe Road is right over the hill on the way to Petaluma.
Okay, thanks.
You said you don't like the term sustainability because it's been co-opted by the agricultural industry. What term would you substitute for?
I use natural process agriculture myself, but sustainability is, I have no problem with the word. But and it has not been, they didn't recognize organic, so they came up with sustainable. My only problem with sustainable is they're happy with a quotient that's static. And that's not life. You're either absorbing life and coming into being, or you're being absorbed. And I'm well over 50. I'm afraid I'm on the being absorbed cycle. And sustainable means I want growth. I want growth on both sides, and that's what leads me happiness.
Yeah.
Natural growth, you said?
Natural
That's the term you use.
Yeah.
I was part
natural process farming.
I was part of the foundation of the sustainable thing for viticulture, and the reason why we did it was to get people encouraged, you know, at a basic level, so they could ultimately end up at the
moving in the right direction.
Right
I have no problem with any of the scoundrels.
Yeah.
No, you got my friend Bob Schaefer went and talked to one of the VIT groups here in the county. I forget which one now. A couple weeks ago, and he's a great soil scientist and understands natural process, and he got a standing ovation. And maybe 10 years ago, he and I both had back-to-back monthly meetings at that Wine Grape Growers Association, and we were like sneered out of the place. But today, they're ready. No, the wine industry is major force leading our nation away from petrochemical and into natural process farming, and it's these counties right around here that are doing it. Yeah. The other day I had 4 prestigious Napa Valley vintners over here. What can we do? How can we get beyond this? They're already biodynamic and they don't see results. How can we get beyond it?
Yeah.
No, the wine industry is they got their client base and their economic fluidity, growing a margin, your net margin in growing foodstuffs rate runs somewhere between, if you're lucky, at 2% gross.
Yeah.
In the wine industry, if you go through growing the fruit and bottling it and marketing it properly, you might have 15% gross.
Yeah.
Might.
Yeah.
No, there's lots of variables in there, but huge difference.
Yes.
And then you have a preserved product. I have perishable product.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just an outstanding presentation.
Hey, thank you very much.
Well, enough of that.
Save all of that energy. See, that makes me be put in the middle of you and your sensory capacities to grow your own garden. And I appreciate your recognition.